if I asked you to spell the sh sound, you would probably just write sh, right?
Yeah, of course. That's the logical way.
Right. You definitely wouldn't write tion. Well, unless, of course, you were spelling a word like action. And I think that just goes to show English is a deeply, profoundly broken language.
Oh, completely. It's a mess.
It really is. Have you ever found yourself just staring at a word like, I don't know, Wednesday? Or maybe lachrymose, and you just stop and wonder, like, why? Why on earth is there a D in Wednesday?
Oh, man. It is the great universal frustration of being a fluent English speaker. You know, you look at a simple string of letters and you just realize the phonetic rules you were taught in kindergarten. They seem to be purely decorative at this point.
Purely decorative. That is so true. Or, you look at the infamous family of words.
Oh, yeah. The worst offenders.
Right. Just picture them in your head right now. Bow, bought, tough, though, and through. Visually, they are almost identical at the end, but you are forced to pronounce every single one of them completely differently.
It makes no sense.
It doesn't. So if you have ever felt, a little insecure about your vocabulary because you tripped over one of these traps, today is absolutely for you. We have an excerpt today from a fascinating text. It's called 999. You're probably saying it wrong.
It's a great piece.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is definitely not to make you feel bad about how you pronounce things, like, at all. It's actually to explain exactly who broke the language.
Exactly. The goal here is really to let you off the hook. We want to shortcut your way to understanding the deeply weird, completely illogical, and roughly 1,000-year-old history of how we speak.
Yeah.
Because once you understand the hidden mechanisms like the actual history, the spelling mistakes you make suddenly make perfect logical sense. The text actually describes English as a mongrel language.
Which is such a good way to put it.
Right. It is essentially this chaotic mashup of Anglo-Saxon, which is Old English, but it's mixed aggressively with Latin, Old Norse, and Anglo-French.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the central thesis of our source material is that English isn't just one language acting by one set of rules. It's kind of like trying to play a board game where everyone at the table brought instructions from a completely different game.
Yeah, and nobody is willing to compromise.
Nobody.
When you take all those different rule books, you just smash them together and then, subject them to the vagaries of time, war, and shifting borders over a literal 1,000 years.
Yeah.
You get a system that is incredibly vulnerable to inconsistencies.
Right.
And actually, here's a detail from the source that perfectly illustrates this. Spelling bees. They are practically unique to the United States.
Which honestly blew my mind. I just assumed every country had kids standing at microphones sweating over silent letters.
Nope. They don't. Other languages generally follow strict phonetic rules. Like, if you see a letter in Spanish or German, you know exactly what sound it makes. English spelling is so exceptionally illogical that we literally had to turn memorizing it into a competitive sport.
That is hilarious. So if the English are essentially just, grabbing vocabulary from 4 different empires, what happens when we steal a word but absolutely refuse to use the instruction manual that came with it?
Well, that's where the trouble starts.
Because I am looking at a word from the source material right now that you see on menus all the time. Visually, it looks like R-A-G-O-U-T. My brain sees the word rag followed by the word out, which frankly sounds like an insult, not a delicious stew.
I mean, in a culinary context, it's a stew of well-seasoned meat and vegetables in a thick sauce. But etymologically, it gets that completely non-phonetic pronunciation, ragout, because it's a direct lift from the French word ragout, right, which means to revive the taste. The English language took the spelling directly, but just kept the French pronunciation, leaving us with this weird visual trick.
But if you think of French stew as a mismatch, the historical journey of the word kernel is absolutely ridiculous. Like, just picture the word in your mind. It starts with C-O-L-O. There is literally no letter R anywhere in the zip code of that word.
Not a single one.
And yet we say K-R null. Where on earth does the R come from?
Okay, so the history of kernel is literally a comedy of errors. It starts with the French taking a military term from the Italians. The Italian word was colonnello, meaning the leader of a column of soldiers.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. The root is column.
Exactly. But when the French adopted it in the 1500s, they just casually altered the spelling to Cornell, swapping the L for an R.
Which our source notes is just like a bizarre thing languages sometimes do to each other's words, right? Just casually swapping an L for an R in everyday speech.
Yeah, it happens. And so English adopts this word from the French, complete with that new R sound. But then by the mid-1600s, both French and English scholars decided, they wanted their language to look more classical.
Oh, here we go.
Yep. So they reverted the spelling back to the etymologically correct Italian root. They swapped the R back to an L.
Wait. You're telling me French and English scholars collaborated to change the spelling back to have an L, but the English just ignored the update when it came to actually speaking?
Pretty much. The French speakers realized, hey, we changed the spelling back to have an L. We should probably change our pronunciation back to match it. So they started pronouncing the L again, English speakers. We locked in the old French pronunciation of Carnot and just stubbornly kept saying it.
Even though the letter was completely erased from the dictionary.
Completely gone.
It reminds me of, a stubborn warmate who insists on keeping a broken, ugly piece of furniture right in the middle of the living room forever. Simply because they are used to walking around it. They know it doesn't make sense, but they absolutely refuse to move it.
That is the ultimate example of a language refusing to update its software. But what's fascinating here is that while words like kernel were just chaotic accidents of adoption, there's a whole other category of confusing words where people actively, deliberately made them harder to spell.
The retroactive meddling. It's one thing to be a linguistic hoarder and, inherit a messy word. It's entirely different when people ruin a perfectly good word just to look smart.
Exactly. This brings us to the academics of the Renaissance. During the 1500s, there was this massive cultural reverence for classical Latin.
Right.
So scholars started looking at English words that had evolved totally naturally over centuries, and they just decided to insert silent letters into them, just to honor the word's ancient Latin ancestor.
I want to talk about the word solder. When you melt a metal alloy to join surfaces together, it's spelled S-O-L-D-E-R, but pronounced S-A-H-der. Yeah. I always assumed the L was just some ancient pronunciation that faded away. But according to the source, up until the 1500s, most spellings of solder didn't even have an L in them.
No, it was entirely fabricated. Scholars shoved the L in there purely to show off the word's connection to its Latin root, solidare, which means to make solid.
Wow.
They altered the spelling of a common working word, knowing full well nobody in a metal shop actually pronounced it that way.
So wait, they intentionally added letters to words that no one was pronouncing just to flex their Latin vocabulary? That is the most incredibly arrogant academic sabotage I have ever heard.
It was a total ego trip.
Yeah.
And one that created centuries of spelling headaches.
Yeah.
And they did the exact same thing to the word victuals, meaning supplies of food or provision.
Right. Because if you read that word purely phonetically, it looks like victuals. It starts with V-I-C-T.
Right. But the word actually came into English through the French word vitaille. So the pronunciation was naturally based on that French spelling. It sounded like victuals.
Victuals. Okay.
But later on, those Renaissance scholars overhauled the spelling to reflect the Latin root victualis, meaning of nourishment.
Mm-hmm.
They crammed a C and a U into the spelling, but everyday people, they just kept saying victuals.
I love how the source points out that dictionaries actually list the phonetic spelling V-I-T-T-L-E-S as a variant today, but it includes this amazing little note saying it's now chiefly used playfully to evoke the supposed language of cowboys.
I know. It's the dictionary quietly admitting that victuals makes infinitely more phonetic sense, but they're only going to let you use it if you're pretending to be in a John Wayne movie.
That is so funny. But, in stark contrast to these scholars adding completely useless letters, you have working class professionals doing the exact opposite. They were taking words and aggressively crushing syllables together for the sake of speed and efficiency.
Yes. This is where language evolution gets really grounded in physical reality. When you use a word every single day in your trade, you literally do not have the metabolic energy for excess syllables.
Okay, let's use cupboard as an example. K-U-barid. The source notes this literally started in the Middle Ages as a cupboard, like a physical board or table where you stored your cups.
Right.
I want you, the listener, to try something right now. Say the literal words cupboard 10 times fast. Cupboard, cupboard, cupboard.
Yeah, if you do that, you will experience a linguistic concept called assimilation. Your mouth just naturally merges the P and the B sounds together. In linguistics, both of those sounds are bilabial consonants, meaning you have to press your lips together to make them.
Okay.
It takes way too much mechanical effort to close your lips for the P, open them, and then instantly close them again for the B. The physical mechanics of your jaw just naturally compress the word into cupboard.
Your mouth is just seeking the path of least resistance. And we see the exact same assimilation with clapboard, pronounced clapboard.
Exactly. Clapboard came to English as a partial translation of the Dutch word kleffout, meaning stave wood, which is likely from the Dutch verb klappen, meaning to hit.
So, hitting wood.
Right. Picture carpenters rhythmically slapping and nailing this wood siding onto houses all day long. The spelling remained clapboard, but the tired workers compressed the pronunciation to calibered.
Though I was really surprised to read that context actually changes how you pronounce it. Like, if you were talking about the slate used in filmmaking, you know, the thing they snap before the director yells action, you actually use the phonetic pronunciation, clapboard.
Right.
But for the wood siding on a house, it's calibered.
And honestly, nowhere is this working-class compression more extreme than with nautical terms. Think about the physical environment for a second. Picture an English sailor on a freezing, gale-battered deck in the 1700s.
Oh, absolutely. Nobody is carefully enunciating when freezing seawater is hitting their face, which perfectly explains bosun and coxswain. You see boat, S-W-A-I-N, but you say B-O-H son, and coxswain is spelled cox, S-W-A-I-N, but it's pronounced K-A-H-K son.
Yeah, so the archaic root word here is swain, which meant boy or servant.
Okay.
So a bosun was the officer taking care of the ship's equipment, and the coxswain, which is derived from cock, meaning a small cockboat, was the sailor steering the ship's boat. The wind and rain literally flattened those distinct syllables into sun.
Thankfully, for bosun at least, the source notes there is a variant spelling that is much kinder to the speller. B-O-S-U-N, bosun. It actually reflects how the mouth makes the sound.
It's a very rare mercy when the dictionary actually updates the spelling to match the working class pronunciation.
Seriously. So, okay, we have words stretched by arrogant scholars and words crushed by freezing sailors. But what about words that are just operating on a completely different phonetic operating system entirely?
Yeah, the Greek traps.
The traps?
These are words that look like they should follow standard English pronunciation, but they carry hidden architectural rules from ancient Greece.
I will admit something right now. For an embarrassing amount of time when I was reading books, I pronounced the word epitome as epitome, E-P-I-T-O-M-E.
Oh, you were definitely not alone in that.
Right, and why wouldn't I? The word tome, meaning a large, heavy book, is sitting right there, perfectly spelled at the end of it. I didn't realize it was the same word I heard people say out loud.
And that visual connection is exactly the trap, because the word tome does come from the Greek word tomos, which meant a roll of papyrus. And that was derived from the verb meaning to cut, because long papyrus scrolls were cut into sections for storage.
Okay, so the cutting part makes sense.
But epitome comes from the related Greek word epitome, meaning to cut short. A piece of writing cut short is a summary, which eventually evolved into our modern meaning of, a perfect example of something.
Oh, wow.
Because of its Greek roots, the rule is you pronounce every single syllable. I, P-I-T, me. The fact that the English word tome is buried inside it visually is just a cruel phonetic coincidence trying to humiliate you.
It is literally a visual prank, and hyperbole does the exact same thing. H-Y-P-E-R-B-O-L-E. When you look at it, it seems like a variation of the Super Bowl, the hyperbole.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really reveals how our brains process language. We are incredible pattern recognition machines. We scan tome in epitome or hyper and bowl in hyperbole, and our brain immediately maps the phonetic rules we already know onto this foreign word.
Except hyperbole uses the hyper from hyperlink, but stresses the second syllable, high key R-E-R, and the ending is bully, rhyming with the word believe, without the V, high PR, bully.
Right, exactly.
Which brings us to perhaps the most relatable part of our deep dive. Here's where it gets really interesting. We move from historical accidents to pure psychological sabotage. What happens when your own brain tries to be helpful by recognizing a pattern that isn't actually there?
This is great. Your brain essentially autocorrects your speech in real time, gets the correction completely wrong. A prime example from the text is remuneration. It means an amount of money paid for work.
Right. It's spelled with an M-R-E-M-U, pronounced remuno, R-A-shun, but I hear people say remuneration constantly.
Because the word is entirely about money. And when your brain thinks about money, it immediately associates it with numbers. So people mispronounce it as renumeration as if it shares a root with numeral or numeric.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, there is no num in remuneration, but your brain forcefully inserts it to make the context fit the vocabulary.
It's making a logical leap that just happens to be etymologically false. We see this visual trickery with the word awry, too, spelled A-W-R-Y. When you scan that word, your brain immediately sees the letters A-W, like in awful or awesome, and then just tacks on the R-Y, R-re.
But functionally, the prefix is just A. It comes from an Old English word meaning to turn, the word rye. So it's A and rye, R-Y-E. Your eyes basically chunk the letters incorrectly.
And it chunks them incorrectly with etc. as well. People constantly say etc.
Because the brain tries to group it with the except excess exciting team of words. There is almost no other common word in the English language that begins with the etset sound, so the brain just grabs the closest familiar phonetic pattern, which is exet.
Our source mentions that dictionaries actually list etc. as an alternate pronunciation, but they label it as non-standard simply because, and I love this phrasing, people who go about disapproving of such things widely disapprove of it.
This raises an important question about how dictionaries actually function. Like, are they strict rule books, or are they meant to be historical records of how people actually speak in the real world? Because we see the exact same tension with the word mischievous.
Oh, mischievous is a classic. M-I-S-C-H-I-E-V-O-U-S, 3 syllables, mischievous. But so many people add an entire extra syllable. They move the emphasis and say mischievy.
Why do our brains insist on adding a phantom I?
The source suggests a really brilliant psychological reason for this. People love making it rhyme with the word devious.
Devious and mischievous share such similar, sneaky meanings that the brain forces them to share a rhyming structure. It's so common that dictionaries give mischievous as an alternate pronunciation, again, labeled non-standard, because linguistic purists absolutely hate it. But, tweaking the word to sound more devious is kind of a mischievous act in itself.
That is so true. The brain is literally remixing the language for dramatic effect. And sometimes the language gets remixed by corporate sabotage. Think about segue, spelled S-E-G-U-E. Usually English words ending in "gu", like vogue, vague, or league, they rhyme with beg.
Right, but segue is pronounced segway. And to make matters infinitely worse, the electric scooter company chose to spell their brand name phonetically as S-E-G-W-A-Y, which essentially ruined the original spelling for an entire generation.
Yeah, that really didn't help. And sometimes your brain is tricked by a word just hiding its past. Like Viscount, spelled V-I-S-C-O-U-N-T. Your brain sees discount with a V, Viscount, but it's actually pronounced V-Y-E count.
It drops the S entirely in speech because etymologically it evolved from Viscount, meaning a deputy or inferior count.
And preternatural, meaning beyond nature, from the Latin praeter naturam. You see P-R-E-T and you instantly think it starts like president or present, but it uses a long E-E sound. Preternatural.
Yeah. And what's perhaps the most maddening is when a word's pronunciation depends entirely on the context of how you use it.
Oh, right.
Let's look at primer. If you were talking about a small, informative introductory book, it's pronounced primer. But if you're talking about the initial coat of paint you put on a wall to prep it, it is P-R-Y, Bremer. Same exact spelling.
Unless you are British. The text notes that in British English, they actually use the long I sound for both, calling the introductory book a P-R-Y-mer as well.
Right. Context also dictates the plural of antenna. We all know the singular, but the plural ending in A, that is pronounced in antennae. But you only use the antennae pronunciation when you're talking about the sensory organs on the heads of insects, or metaphorically like a politician's instincts, their political antennae.
But if you're talking about the metal sticks on top of cars or buildings used to receive radio waves, the plural is just the standard antennas. The bug gets the fancy Latin plural, the car gets the regular English one.
It's all about recognizing which historical thread the specific usage is pulling from. The biology thread kept the Latin, but the technology thread modernized it.
So what does this all mean for us? If there is one thing you take away from this deep dive, let it be profound validation. If you mispronounce these words, you are not ignorant. You are just a victim of 1,000 years of overlapping empires, pretentious Renaissance scholars showing off their Latin, fast-talking sailors freezing on the ocean, and your own highly efficient brain trying to connect dots that aren't actually there.
Exactly. Knowledge is most valuable when it's applied to the real world. The next time you see a bizarre spelling that frustrates you or someone corrects your pronunciation at a dinner party, don't just get annoyed. Look for the hidden history inside it. That strange, silent letter or missing syllable is usually a clue to a much bigger, much older story.
Every confusing word is just a tiny little history museum. But before we go, here's a final thought for you to mull over. We talked about how dictionaries now include victuals as a playful variant, and they explicitly note things like mischievous and etc. as non-standard simply because purists dislike them. But if English is entirely defined by how everyday people actually use it, at what point does a collective nationwide mistake permanently become the new correct rule of the English language.
It's a great point. Language is always moving. The mistake of today is very often the rule of tomorrow.
The next time you find yourself staring at the word Wednesday, just remember you're looking at 1,000 years of beautiful, chaotic history. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive, and stay curious.